He proclaimed it the 12-day war, but even at the stroke of midnight, rockets still rained down. Is this truly the end or just the calm before a new storm? With those electrifying words, global headlines erupted when President Donald Trump unexpectedly stepped up to announce a high-stakes ceasefire between Israel and Iran. For nearly 2 weeks, the world's eyes had been glued to breaking news bulletins and dramatic video feeds of precision airstrikes, missile launches, and battles that flared across the Middle East with astonishing speed. And now, in a single speech, Trump declared that peace was finally at hand, at least for 24 hours. But how did we get to this moment of chaos, confusion, and now, potential armistice? Today we're going to dig into every explosive detail, reveal the swirling behind-the-scenes drama, and unpack what truly happened leading up to this midnight ceasefire agreement. Intriguingly, minutes before Trump's statement, Iranian officials contradicted one another on social media. Some insisted the only reason they might pause hostilities was to see Israel stop its illegal aggression. Others claimed that no formal ceasefire agreement even existed. So, is this a legitimate, lasting truce or just a fragile pause? And most importantly, how did a sudden flurry of ballistic missile attacks, including one on the United States Al Udeid air base in Qatar, along with massive Israeli air raids over Tehran, escalate so quickly to the point of requiring an international spotlight from dawn till dusk? In this explosive episode, we're zooming in on the chain of events, on the key players demanding instant retribution, and on the battered nuclear facilities that became ground zero for some of the most dramatic confrontations in recent Middle East history. We'll delve into how close the region danced, to the brink of something even bigger, and whether we're still standing on a razor's edge. First things first, let's set the stage. Over the last 12 days, tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States hit a fever pitch. The spark? Several alleged provocations, culminating in U.S.-led strikes on Iranian nuclear sites near the beginning of this showdown. Washington insisted it was responding to intelligence indicating an imminent threat, while Tehran condemned the attacks as blatant acts of war on its sovereign territory. On the surface, you might think this fits the familiar pattern of escalate, then step back, a script the world has witnessed repeatedly in the Middle East. But what transpired in this short time frame was anything but ordinary, because both sides took aim at each other's most fortified strongholds and made moves that many analysts declared unthinkable just weeks prior. According to on-the-ground reports and official confirmations, Iranian forces launched ballistic missiles targeting Al Udeid air base in Qatar, a massive American installation that many believed was protected by a shield of Patriot and other advanced defense systems. That strike, perceived by Iran as payback for the earlier U.S. bombing of sensitive nuclear infrastructure, rattled Washington deeply. No American casualties were reported, but the psychological effect was monumental. Meanwhile, on a nearly parallel track, Israel ramped up what it described as a once-in-a-generation strike campaign against Iran's capabilities at home. Tel Aviv's war planners singled out missile storage caches, drone bases, and, in an unexpected twist, the regime's internal security and repression organs. When images of Israel's jets roaring over Tehran's suburbs and missiles hitting sites like Evin Prison, as well as the headquarters of the Basij paramilitary force, flooded international news networks, many global leaders voiced alarm that the conflict had crossed the line from strategic strikes to targeting the underlying apparatus that keeps Iran's leadership in power. In other words, these weren't just bombs aimed at nuclear facilities or at air defenses. They were hitting the intangible, internal backbone of the Iranian regime, from intelligence units to prisons infamous for housing political detainees. Yet a truly baffling twist came when the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, posted on the social media platform X that while there was no formal agreement on ceasefire, the Iranian government would refrain from further escalation if Israel halted its aggression by 4 a.m. Tehran time. That contradiction between the official acceptance of Trump's announced ceasefire and Araghchi's cautionary statements quickly ignited a media frenzy. Was the Iranian side serious about quieting the guns or setting conditions that might be impossible to meet? What a story, right? If you are as gripped by these unfolding events as I am, consider giving a thumbs up or subscribing so you don't miss any of our deep dive breakdowns in the future. We're only scratching the surface here, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop. Moving on, let's talk about how Trump's announcement dropped on the world stage. broadcast live and then reposted on his Truth social feed, it painted a surprisingly detailed timetable. Starting roughly 6 hours after his speech, Iran would cease all offensive operations for 12 hours, simultaneously giving Israeli forces the chance to halt their own campaign. Then, once the Iranian half of the ceasefire concluded, the Israelis would begin their own 12-hour stand-down. If these sequential 12-hour periods hold, we'd have a total of 24 hours of calm, enough, the administration believes, to freeze the conflict in place and pave the way for negotiations that could end what Trump dubbed the 12-day war. But how likely is it to hold? Analysts are divided. Some see the concept of a time-staggered ceasefire as too fragile, on the grounds that it effectively places a big portion of the onus on the Iranian regime to stop first. If they comply but see Israeli drones still flying overhead, or hear rumors of clandestine operations continuing, any slip could trigger new rocket launches and sabotage the entire agreement. Others commend the boldness, arguing that the Iranian leadership's pride might be less wounded by not simultaneously stopping at exactly the same moment as Israel. Perhaps this structure allows both sides a face-saving mechanism. But let's not forget, the bulk of the attention is also on the battered Iranian nuclear sites, hammered in repeated waves of airstrikes by both the U.S. and Israel. Reconnaissance images from 2 days ago, as well as official statements, indicate that advanced centrifuges, missile engines, and some subterranean storage areas were destroyed, or at least seriously compromised. Israeli drones apparently targeted the Fordow nuclear site's data infrastructure, leading to speculation that these strikes aim not merely to degrade hardware, but to sever command and control lines used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. After all, the IRGC is widely viewed as the spearhead of Tehran's offensive might, not just abroad, but also for domestic crackdowns. So, crippling their communications could hamper both foreign aggression and the regime's capacity to police its own people. Indeed, the emphasis on attacking the so-called repression apparatus stands out like a lightning bolt. Observers note that Israel's June 23rd strikes zeroed in on multiple bases: the Thar Allah headquarters, the Basij headquarters, the Mohammad Rasul Allah base, the Syed al-Shuhada corps, the Al-Borz corps, the IRGC Intelligence Protection Command, plus the notorious Evin prison. These are not sites primarily associated with ballistic missiles or nuclear research. Rather, they represent the power structure that enforces the regime's will within Iran, monitors dissidents, and keeps the nation under tight surveillance. Eliminating or even damaging them can deal a psychological blow, sending a message: we can touch not just your physical power, but the secret police and intelligence units that keep your leadership entrenched. To the Iranian regime, that is as much an act of defiance as any direct blow to their nuclear ambitions. But how did we lurch from sporadic tensions to direct hits on these sensitive forces? You might recall that Israel had exchanged harsh words with Tehran countless times before. However, the difference this round appears to be twofold. One, Iran's ballistic missile strike on the U.S. base in Qatar significantly broadened the scope, pulling in Washington as a direct target. If Tehran was willing to strike American installations so openly, the intelligence community reasoned, it might be on the edge of unleashing more brazen attacks across the region. Two, after repeated missile tests and rhetorical bombast, Israel's patience seemingly reached its limit. Netanyahu's administration, though replaced by new leadership in some versions of current events, always harbored a low tolerance for perceived Iranian escalation. And once the first Israeli bombs fell near Tehran's high-value facilities, each subsequent volley seemed to up the ante. In the timeline of events, the strike set off a domino effect. On June 22nd, Israeli forces reportedly destroyed a surface-to-air missile launcher in central Tehran, then launched even deeper raids as far as Yazd, over 2,000 kilometers from Israeli territory. We saw drone and missile hits in Esfahan, Bushehr, and Ahvaz as well. The scope was unprecedented. Meanwhile, Iranian ballistic missiles soared through the skies, some aimed at Israeli air or naval forces, others apparently at U.S. positions. Iran fired about 30 drones toward Israel on the night of June 21st, all of which were intercepted, but the psychological impact on the population still reverberated. Curiously, the drama has gone beyond simple bomb versus bomb narratives. The moment Trump tweeted he'd be making a major announcement, conjecture swept in that the U.S. might be preparing a ground incursion or unveiling a new wave of crippling sanctions. Instead, the president surprised many by stepping in to broker what he perceives as a big victory for his brand of diplomatic showmanship, a chance at a negotiated ceasefire that might, in his words, pave the way for an even stronger realignment in the Middle East. Skeptics, however, highlight that no direct lines of negotiation were visible. The purported deal might have come through hush-hush mediators, possibly the Qataris or Oman, who in the past have performed the role of discreet go-betweens. But we must ask, even if the guns go silent for a day, what about day 2 or day 3? The crisis has deeper roots, proliferation concerns, ideological animosity between Iran and Israel, plus the U.S. stance on controlling Iran's ballistic missile program. Throw in Iran's retaliation for perceived encroachments on its sovereignty, plus the psychological factor of having foreign warplanes streaking across its skies. And we have a recipe for a fragile calm at best. Many Iranian hardliners bristle at the idea of backing down without a visible concession from Tel Aviv or Washington. And on the Israeli side, the impetus to keep destroying potentially lethal Iranian infrastructure remains strong. It begs the question, will the real winner in this scenario be time itself? By halting the conflict, even temporarily, perhaps negotiators can come up with a more lasting resolution. Alternatively, time might let each side regroup, rearm, and attempt an even sharper blow once the window for official calm is shut. That tension alone is enough to keep us all on pins and needles. Every new statement from the Iranian Foreign Ministry or from key Israeli defense officials is being scrutinized line by line. Are they hedging? Are they preparing the public for a bigger confrontation later? We also shouldn't overlook the effect on the region's populace. In Tehran, watchers say the busiest streets have emptied out in some neighborhoods, with a sense of dread intensifying. In districts 6 and 7, local residents were reportedly directed to move or face hazards if the conflict continued. And with rumors swirling that more ballistic missiles could be launched, or that another wave of drone attacks might be inbound, everyday life grows complicated and frightening. Business owners wonder whether to keep shops open or shutter them for safety. Families weigh whether to stay put or flee if the next wave of airstrikes sets key infrastructure ablaze. Similarly, in Israel, the tension is sky high, especially in areas where sirens for incoming missiles or rockets might sound at any moment. Military service members are on full alert, many leaving their loved ones behind to staff critical defense positions. The cost of this level of mobilization, in terms of national stress and financial resources, is astronomical. All it would take is a single miscalculation, a stray missile, an inadvertent crossing of lines, for the entire ceasefire plan to implode. Yet ironically, this precariousness might be fueling the determination to see the truce succeed. Even the slimmest chance for relief can unite ordinary citizens on both sides, no matter how strong the official rhetoric remains. Now, let's circle back to that dramatic moment when Iran's Revolutionary Guard decided to strike Al Udeid Air Base. This was a direct challenge to the U.S. military presence in the region. Cowboys in Washington might have previously threatened swift retribution for any such attack. The surprise is that the missiles caused no casualties, either by design on Iran's part or due to the robust Patriot systems in the area. Observers speculated that Tehran wanted to send a message, an unequivocal demonstration that it has the means to strike major American sites, while attempting to avoid a full-scale conflagration that an American death might trigger. The question remains whether that message was wholeheartedly received in the White House and the Pentagon. And what about the domestic front in Iran? We can't ignore that internal dissent is a constant concern for the regime. If people see their government's resources poured into a fight with Israel while living conditions worsen, discontent could spike. On the other hand, nationalistic fervor might also rise, rallying people under the banner of defending Iranian sovereignty. Striking the Basij, the IRGC Intelligence Protection Command, and Evin Prison, those were bold moves by Israel. They targeted institutions intimately involved in quelling protests and punishing dissidents. The subtle implication might be that if Tehran diverts too much attention outward, it risks letting cracks form at home. This psychological warfare angle underscores how highly orchestrated the Israeli strategy may be. Meanwhile, inside the Israeli defense establishment itself, debates swirl about the next steps, particularly if a stable ceasefire fails to materialize. Air Force officials speak of a synchronized wave of strikes that could push the Iranian regime back 5 or 10 years in nuclear development if executed with maximum force. But that would require risking an unprecedented level of conflict escalation, something that could ripple across the whole region, drawing in not only American forces, but possibly other neighbors who might see an opportunity or a threat. The Middle East is rarely a simple two-player chessboard. There are always countless pieces moving, from Gulf monarchies to non-state actors and superpower patrons. If this all feels as tense to you as it does to me, it might be worthwhile to take a second and tap that subscribe button if you want deeper investigations into the biggest global conflicts. That way, you'll never miss the next twist in this gripping, high-stakes saga. Let's not forget the broader diplomatic ramifications. Washington's relationship with Tel Aviv, though typically strong, has faced friction whenever U.S. officials worry that Israeli actions might drag them into a bigger war. The strike on Al Udeid caused a sharp intake of breath. If the IRGC dared to hit an American base over U.S. attacks on nuclear sites, how would Iran respond if faced with a purely Israeli-driven onslaught? That question keeps many in the Pentagon awake at night. For now, it appears the White House has thrown its weight behind the ceasefire concept, seeing it as somewhat consistent with calls for a pause to let cooler heads prevail. But whether world powers like Russia, China, or the European Union might step in to mediate in a more formal capacity is uncertain. Each has its own complicated relationships and interests in the region. Even equally dramatic is the effect on the nuclear negotiations, if you can still call them that. Before this conflict exploded, European officials had hoped to revive some iteration of the nuclear deal. Now, after bombs have hammered sites across half of Iran and ballistic missiles soared in retaliation, that dream might not just be on life support. It may have flatlined. For Iranian hardliners, how do they justify renewed dialogue with Western nations when the wounds from bomb craters are still fresh? For the West, how can they trust a government that showcased its readiness to hurl missiles at American bases? This is the inescapable conundrum. Do you test the waters for a diplomatic solution at risk of appearing weak, or do you retain a hardened stance to try to contain Iran's war-making capacity? As for the Israeli perspective, it has historically viewed an unchecked Iranian nuclear program as an existential threat. The entire premise of a future nuclear-armed Iran remains a non-starter for virtually any Israeli administration. That's part of the impetus behind these large-scale strikes. For years, intelligence leaks suggested Israel had detailed operational plans to strike Iranian nuclear sites, waiting only for the green light. Echoes of the attacks on the Osirak reactor in Iraq decades ago, or the bombardment of another suspect site in Syria, resonate. But rarely, if ever, has the Israeli military so openly targeted the nerve centers of internal Iranian security, like the Basij. That marked a new threshold, one that could foreshadow a deeper shift in Israel's long-term strategy. With so many moving parts, it's difficult to predict what exactly will happen when the clock strikes that fateful hour for Iran's half of the ceasefire, and then later for Israel's. Will we wake up to see more plumes of smoke and furious rhetoric negating Trump's big announcement? Or will we see the beginning of actual diplomacy, perhaps behind closed doors with middlemen from small Gulf states or from Europe, trying to hash out a face-saving formula? The Iranian leadership might rationalize that even if they hate the optics, a temporary freeze could let them regroup. Israel, exhausted by days of high sortie rates, might also welcome a strategic pause. But if the tension in the voices of the Iranian foreign ministry is anything to go by, coupled with Trump's flamboyant showmanship, this is surely not the end of the Middle East's scariest chapter in recent memory. It might just be an interlude, a single, uncertain step away from total conflagration. That alone could hold the global audience captive for days to come. Each headline a new jolt to the collective pulse of watchers everywhere. The region's fate could hang on the success or failure of this sequential ceasefire. And in the background, a million everyday stories of families, businesses, dreams, and fears play out in hastily sandbagged living rooms and in bunkers beneath starless skies lit by rocket trails. These are the human lives overshadowed by the grand political stage. Soon enough, we may see fresh statements from Washington or Tehran clarifying the next path. Perhaps Russian and Chinese ministers will weigh in, calling for a more binding arrangement that stops short of inflicting further devastation on Iranian soil. Perhaps new conditions will appear last minute, some face-saving new spin that frames the outcome as a win for all sides. For now, no one truly knows. Whatever emerges, it's certain that these past 2 weeks will go down in history for how quickly and dramatically tensions escalated and how uncertain the resolution remains. If indeed this conflict, this 12-day war, is winding down, it's left behind more than its share of rubble, heartbreak, and unanswered questions. But we do know one thing. You and I will be here to follow every beat of the story, shining a spotlight on the facts, the speculation, and the deeper currents that shape these events. So whenever you see the next headline shouting ceasefire extended another day, or hostilities resume in Tehran amid confusion, remember all the puzzle pieces laid out here. The volatile mixture that created a scenario in which one missile or one miscommunication could tilt the entire region back into devastating conflict. In this churning landscape, knowledge and awareness are powerful tools for all of us to navigate the truth behind the headlines. The story is still unfolding, and how it ends might yet surprise the world.